Okay guys, so this is going to be the first part of the minigun tutorial series, and we're going to start with the modeling. Now before we begin, I usually try to go and find orthographic images of whatever I'm going to be modeling. In this case, a minigun. So all I need really is a side shot. Now for those of you that don't know what orthographic means, it's basically a top, front, right, left, bottom, and so on view. And of course you can always render out those types of views within Cinema 4D, but usually for real world objects you have to get a camera and you actually have to take a side shot or a front, back, bottom, and so on and so forth. So I tried to look around to see if I could find any side views of a minigun, and I actually came across one, and it's going to look a little different than the one in the original animation that I did. And instead of actually going back and remaking that exact gun, I decided that we are going to do an automated gun. And what I mean by automated is that it does not require an operator, so there isn't going to be any triggers or handles. It's all going to be kind of self-contained towards the back and self-fed, so you're really not going to see any of the bullets actually going into the chamber. All we're going to be seeing is just an exit port, and we're going to set up an emitter later to actually fire all of the shells, the empty casings, out of the side of the gun. But for now we're just going to concentrate on the modeling. So what I want to do is go into a right view, and if you hit Shift V, that will bring up the attributes for that specific view that you're in. And we want to go to the back tab, and right here for the image you can click on this. This will bring you, will pull up your directories for you, and you can actually go find the image that you want to use. Or in this case you can just open up a window here and you can take your image and you can drag it in and release it, and there's the minigun. Now right now this grid is getting in the way, so I'm going to turn it off by going to Filter, Grid. Okay, so there's our minigun side view, and we're not going to be doing this handle and all this intricate hosing and wiring and all that. We basically just want the shapes of the barrels, the exit part here, and we want some of these larger cylinders, but there's going to be a very large casing that goes around the back of this. So let's get started by starting here on these barrels. So the first thing I want to do is just start with a simple cylinder, and we're going to need to change the display here because right now you can see it's in wireframe. So we'll go to the ground shading, wireframe, there we go. And if you want to, you can actually turn on X-ray, and whenever your object is selected it will have an transparency to it where you can actually see through it. Now in this case I really don't think we're going to need it, but you can use it if you want to. So I'm going to change this to a +Z orientation. I'm going to take the radius down until it fits the overall shape and the size of this barrel. Okay, that looks pretty good. So we just want to extend it, and that looks okay right there. So now we're going to need 6 of these babies. So let's start by clicking on the cylinder. We'll go to MoGraph, and we're going to Alt click, so hold down Alt and click the cloner object. And when you Alt click, what that does is it adds the object that you had selected as a child of whatever you're alt clicking, in this case the cloner object, and it also places it at the same location. Okay, so this is wrong orientation right now. We need to change the mode to radial. Okay, and we want to give a count of 6, and the radius is going to need to be brought down. So let's select a cloner object. Let's position this there in the middle of that, and we'll bring the radius down to about there. Okay, so now we need to make sure that none of these barrels are actually hitting each other. They're not. That looks good. Now this is totally up to you if you want to do this, but you'll notice there's a lot of polygons in there, and I kind of like to keep that because it actually helps give a more rounded look. And if we take this cylinder and you take the rotational segments down, you can see now It's not looking like a complete circle. It looks more like a hexagon or an octagon. So if you want to use a low poly version, go right ahead and do that. But for me, I'm just going to take this back up to the default setting of 36. Okay, so now let's get back and let's select the cloner object, and let's alt click another cylinder, and that's going to put that directly in the center of all of these other barrels. But it's also made the cloner barrels a child of that cylinder we just brought in. So we just need to click the cloner and drag that out. Okay, so this cylinder here is going to be called the tip. And we need to change the orientation on that to Z. Drag that out to the front. And we need to play around with some of these settings here because it's a little too wide at the moment. So we'll take the radius down. 32 looks pretty good. Okay, now we want to start playing around with this tip. So this is where you can be creative. You don't actually have to follow along with what I'm doing. You can actually add your own bevels and designs to it. But I'm going to go ahead and make it editable. Now, by default, whenever you make a cylinder editable, you need to optimize it. If you don't, this is what's going to happen. Let's go to polygon mode real quick, and we'll just select these front faces, and we'll pull them out, and you notice the cap has been disconnected from the main body. And the reason for that is because this the cylinder, when made editable, it's actually in 3 parts. However, there's only one object here in the object manager. So what we need to do is go to point mode, make sure no points are selected, and just call up the optimize command and click OK. Now I've got mine over here in the toolbar, but you can also go to function optimize. And now when we grab hold of those polygons and pull them out, now it's all one object. Okay, so I'm going to take the radius of my live selection tool down. I usually don't like to work with a very large brush size. So I'm going to grab these polys and I'm going to go to an extrude enter. The default angle is set to, the maximum angle by default is set to 89. And it's the same way with the extrude tool as well. Now this causes a problem when you try to do certain extrusions and inner extrusions that have certain angles. So I usually like to take them and take it up to maybe around 120, and that usually solves the problem. So now I'm just going to make some extrusions here, but I need to go to a front view because if I go too far with it, well, now I'm intersecting those barrels, and then if I extrude inward, now that looks like that, which looks like crap. So I don't want to do that. So let's go back, and I'm just going to take it to about there. Use the extrude tool to push that in, maybe about right there. Okay, that looks good. So we need to go back up here to this cylinder, which is here, and I just turned the cloner object off, and we need to make that one editable as well and optimize it. And we need to open this up on the end. So I'm going to do the same inner extrusion, and I'm going to extrude it inward. I'm going to take that in quite a bit. And the front of this really isn't going to be seen by the camera because, like in the animation that I did, the camera was back here behind the gun. So we really don't need to make any types of bevels or anything like that. Now if you want to, you can do more to the front if you plan to make some render still images or maybe some animations showing the front. But since we're not really going to be doing any of the front here, there's really no need to go into great detail on that. So let's turn the cloner back on. Alright, now we need to grab the tip and select those inner polys again, Do another extrude inner. This is going to be brought to the inside, like so. And this is going to be the main support barrel that goes right down the center of all of these other barrels. So all we have to do is use the extrude tool to extrude, and I'm just going to go to a top view, and then we can just grab that extrusion and pull it all the way back to the back side of those barrels. Just like that. That looks pretty good. Alright, now seeing as how the camera is going to be looking at the back, I'm going to take this tip and I'm going to go and bevel these edges. So you can go into line mode and let's do a loop selection. So you could do that by going to selection, loop selection, or I've become accustomed to using the keyboard shortcut, which is U. So you hit UL, that will bring up the loop selection, and all you got to do is just move the mouse until it is selected around the outside perimeter of the back side of this tip, and then click it. Now those lines are selected, and now we're going to choose bevel, and we need to set the type. It's currently set to linear, and if we choose linear and bevel, that's what it's going to look like, and I kind of want a rounded bevel. So we need to choose convex, and I want a subdivision of about 3. So now we'll bevel again, and now we have a nice rounded corner on that backside, and that could possibly pick up some highlights when the camera is kind of moving around behind the gun. And we could probably do it on the front as well. We might as well go ahead and just do the front. So make a loop selection on the front, and let's hold down shift and do another one on the inside. Go back to bevel, and we don't want to go too far here, so let's do it about to there. Alright, that's pretty good. Could probably do one on this inside piece as well. Like I said, the camera's not really going to be on the front picking that up, but we're here, we might as well bevel it. Okay, so it's beginning to take shape, look pretty good. Now we want to go back to a side view, and we want to see what else is coming down the line with these barrels. And there is another cylinder that we need to add there. So let's click the cloner object and alt-click another cylinder. Drag the cloner object out. We're going to call this one mid-cylinder. Change the orientation to +Z. And I'm going to now squeeze this down so it fits. Probably want to turn this stuff off so we can see that reference picture a little better. Doesn't have to be exact. Okay. Okay, so we just want to do some quick little basic extrusions on the inside of this. So we need to make this cylinder editable as well and optimize it. And we'll go into polygon mode, and I'm just going to select the cap polys and use an extrude inner. But before we do, I want to make sure that I'm not going to be intersecting the barrel, so I need to turn everything back on. And we'll bring that down and extrude inward just a little bit. And maybe we'll add one more. That way we've got one there and one on the front side as well. Okay, so we'll check and see if there is anything else. There is a little bit of a, looks like a nut bolt there. I don't really think I'm too worried about that right now, so maybe we'll come back and do that later, but for right now I just want to get the basic shape down. Okay, the next thing is going to be this big body. Now, like I said earlier, we're not going to be making the trigger and the handle and all of that. We just want the larger cylinders that are here in this area. So, I'm going to turn everything back on. And to keep this big cylinder in line, I'm going to select the cloner object again, and I'm going to create another cylinder. This one's going to be called main body. We'll drag that back here, and we need to make this a little larger because it looks like it's going to be up here. Maybe it's already large enough. Okay, that looks pretty good right there. That's a pretty good size. So we've got that, and now we just want to kind of play around with the front here. You'll notice that on the front of this reference there is a kind of a little bit of a linear bevel there, and there's also some little bit of detail in there. So we can add that here really quick. And you don't actually have to follow along with the reference that I'm using. You can actually use your own. I'll be providing this reference here. I'll be providing this here with the tutorial with this first part, so you can actually follow along with it if that's what you want to do. So let's optimize this. Okay, and we'll go to polygon mode. And I think maybe what I want to do, instead of actually beveling that like that, let's go to knife, and we want to choose a loop, and we want to deselect restrict to selection. And I want to go to a side mode here, a side view, and I want to make a cut about right there. And I also want to make another cut maybe about right there. Okay, so there we have two loop cuts, and I'm going to go to a line mode. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to bevel that like so. And just to add a little detail to it, I'm going to select all those inside faces, extrude, enter, and I'm going to pull that out just a little bit, maybe a little bit more. Now currently that really doesn't look great, the angle and the shading, and that's because we need to change the Fong angle. So if you click on the Fong tag here, it's currently set to 80 degrees. So let's take this down to something like 25, and now that bevel and that those polygons we just pulled out, now you can actually see a little better detail in there, and that looks a lot better. So let's go back, and we need to make a loop selection, and here, and let's do an extrude, and we need to change the maximum angle here to about 120. Now the problem here is that when we start to extrude, now we've got this odd looking lip, which is right there because of the bevel we first made. Now we can do some, you can hit Control Z and do a bunch of undos, and that will take you back, and you can actually redo that if you want, or you can just make the extrude, go to line mode, and then make a bevel on this one. So now we've got two lips there, and that really doesn't look all that bad. So now let's concentrate on the back side, because there's going to be a box that contains the ammunition that sits back here. So we really don't need to do too much detail there. And what we do need to do is add this cylinder here on the top and possibly one on the bottom. But we need to be cautious of where we put the one on the bottom, because we're going to make this on a rotating mount that this gun is going to be mounted to, and we want to rig the mount so that the gun can aim while the mount turns, and we don't want any of those cylinders to get into the way and intersect with the geometry that's going to be making up the mount. So let's grab another cylinder, and we'll place this one on top. And this one will be the cylinder. It's going to go up here. Okay. Now you can see that that's not really going to work because that almost looks like it's just kind of merged. So what we need to do is just kind of adjust some of the geometry to make this look like this is actually a cylinder that's sitting there. But for this, what we'll do is just leave it sitting as though on top, and we'll just make and model a little bracket with a bolt going through it to hold the top cylinder and the bottom cylinder on. Now this one here looks like it's kind of sitting over to the right a little bit in this image. So we'll go to a front view again, and we'll take this top cylinder and we'll take it over and place it about there. So it just kind of offsets and sits like that. Now it does look like we're going to need to take it down because it's not resting on the main body. You can see there's a little bit of a gap in there. So let's go to a back view. Change the display to ground shading, wireframe, and we need to see some lines. So let's go to ground shading lines, and we'll just bring that down like that. Okay, there we go. Just like that. Now we just need to add some detail to this top part. So we'll just quickly knock out some extrusions and maybe some beveling here. So we'll make this cylinder editable, go to point mode, optimize it, and we'll call this top cylinder. And I'm going to change the Phong angle on this to 25 as well. I'm going to select those front polys, extrude inner, and let's make a little extrusion. Maybe something like that. We'll go to line mode. We'll select these lines here that make up the corners, and we'll bevel them like that. Okay, that looks pretty good. And now we just want to build a little low poly version of a bracket that's going to fit here on the front. So I'm going to choose a front view, and I just want to build something right there that's just going to act as a bracket that's coming off of the main body that will just look as though like this just isn't floating there or stuck to it with glue. There's actually something bolted there to hold it into place. So to do that, we're going to work with a spline. Now we could use a pre-made spline, like maybe perhaps an arc spline or maybe a circle spline. To be honest with you, I think maybe what we're going to just do is just draw a spline by hand. That's probably the best way to go about doing this, and then we can just adjust the points from there. So let's go with a linear spline. And whenever you're drawing a spline in one of these orthographic views, it's always going to, the points are always going to show up at the world origin grid. And what I mean by that is, let's just say we go to a top view and we draw a linear spline like so. And we go back, you'll notice that it's sitting flat. And if we turn the grid back on, it's sitting flat on this grid. Now imagine here at the world origin, which is where this X, Y, and Z arrows meet directly in the center. This is called the origin. This is the origin of your 3D environment. Imagine, if you will, a grid like this grid you see here, and the grid is going up and then to the side. So there will be 3 grids there. So if you're drawing a spline from this angle and you draw the spline here from that view, it's going to come up flat along this y-axis as if there was a long grid, a vertical grid along that axis there. And if you're drawing from this side, it's going to be one along the same y-x axis. So just keep that in mind whenever you are drawing a spline from one of those views. and I'll show you here what I mean, just in case you didn't understand what I just said. So what we want to do is draw a spline in here that's going to be the basic shape of the bracket that we're going to be using. Okay, so let's go ahead and draw this spline that we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start maybe about there. I'm going to click there. You can see the spline is already starting to show up here by this white line that fades to blue. And we're going to make another point there. Then we're going to come up here and click about here. And then click back to here. And that's going to close our spline for us. Now, if the spline handles get in the way, you can hit Alt-D. That will move those handles out of the way, and now you can see exactly where you're drawing your spline. Sometimes those handles will get in the way, so you'll need to hit Alt-D in order to remove them. But just be sure to hit Alt-D again to bring it back, because you'll probably want to move some of those points around, and it's going to be kind of hard to move them without that handle. So hit Alt-D to bring it back. So this here, we do not want a triangle shape. We actually want this to be rounded. So click the spline, and what we want to do is we want to make that a Bezier type spline. So I've got my little interpolation commands over here in the toolbar, and I want a soft interpolation. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. Now if you don't know how to get to it, you just go to Structure, Edit Spline, Soft Interpolation. And now we have these two tangent handles, and now we can actually grab those handles and pull those handles out to adjust how sharp or how rounded we want this bracket to be. Okay, so that looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to go back to a perspective view. And remember earlier I told you that anytime you draw a spline, it's going to appear along an invisible grid that's going to be the world origin. So you'll notice that this spline is in line with this Y and X axis plane. It didn't draw the spline out here or up against the polygons. It actually drew it in the world center. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so there's our bracket design. So while we got that spline selected, go to the extrude node and hold down Alt, and there is our bracket starting to take shape. So I don't want it to be that thick, but what I want to do first of all is move it back. So I'm going to move this back to about there, and I'm going to seat it up against that cylinder like that. And that bracket looks a little too thick, so I'm going to take it and bring it down to maybe half of what it was, and take that back some more and seat it up against there, just like that. Now the next problem is going to be seating it against this big cylinder. I think though it looks pretty good. Let's change the view here to ground shading lines, and just to be sure that it is seated, yeah it is. Okay, there's a little bit of intersection there, and that's okay as long as it's sitting against the cylinder. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't up in the air or sitting too far below. So that actually looks pretty good. Alright, so we're going to call this bracket. And I'm not quite sure if we need one on the back or not. Yep, we probably do. So let's just control, click, and drag down to make a copy. And we'll pull that to the back and seat it up against there like so. And things are starting to take shape and look pretty good. It's actually starting to look like a minigun. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, these two brackets, and I'm going to drag them and make them a copy as the top cylinder. I'm going to take that top cylinder, and I'm going to control, click and drag to make a duplicate of it. And now I'm just going to rotate that around. And I don't really know how far I want to go with this. Let's see, where is that bottom cylinder sitting? Okay, it looks like it's going to be sitting here over to the left side of the gun as well. But if I put it there, it's going to get in the way of the rotating mount that we're going to be building. So I'm just going to place this where I think it's going to work best. It's going to be underneath the gun. And we're just going to have to put it where it's going to work the best, which is probably going to be right there. Okay, that looks pretty good. So there we have our 2 cylinders on the outside, and now we need to start working on the box that's going to be on the back that contains the ammunition. But before I go any further, it looks like I'm coming up on about 30 minutes already so far on this. So I'm going to go ahead and upload this part, and I'm going to save this, and then we'll continue with the modeling in part 2.